One of the things about daring change is that in hindsight, the choices and decisions that launch it often look as though they were so right, so obviously where we wanted to go, that they must have been easy. Easy perhaps to one who saw things in the remarkable way that President Sawyer did, but not always easy in the moment, not always comfortable, not always calm. One of the daring changes, one of the first daring changes of the Sawyer era was the decision to eliminate required attendance at weekly religious services. This was in 1962. Now, I'm guessing that that particular daring change was one that was costly to those who made it among some constituencies, but not necessarily others. The way it worked before 1962 was that every student at Williams, every weekend, had to get a token that he could only get by attending a religious service, either in Thompson Memorial Chapel or by going to Mass or going to a Shabbat service. Williams at least granted tokens in those days for attendance at other kinds of services besides ones held in the chapel, although certainly the prevailing winds of the time were decidedly Protestant Christian. So I'm guessing that the people who had to collect those tokens week by week may have viewed that change as a daring one, but a welcome one. One of the things I think that makes that change look, in hindsight to us, so very right, even so obvious, is that the idea of compelled belief, of compulsory participation in a particular belief system seems almost unthinkable, irrational, ridiculous, offensive to us now. So we can thank God or thank Jack Sawyer or thank both that those days at Williams are now 51 years in the past. But to say that compelled belief is wrong for us is not, I think, to say that there aren't beliefs that are compelling. And so, in the little time that I have with you this morning, I want to propose a few beliefs for you to entertain, at least politely, for these few minutes, see what you think of them. Now, that's probably already making you a little nervous, but I'm the chaplain. It's my job to deal in this language, so proposing a few beliefs may be something that I can get away with at least for a few minutes. And after all, the topic for this block is what will we learn, and that's about content, and the content of what I'm about is often beliefs. Sometimes we even assemble them into creeds, although I promise you we're not going there today. But to make you a little more comfortable with the idea of proposing beliefs, I'm going to immediately invite an iconoclast into the conversation in the person of the poet laureate of New England of a century or century and a half ago, Emily Dickinson, who wrote in a letter to a dear friend, "We believe and disbelieve 100 times an hour, which keeps believing nimble." I like the idea of there being compelling disbelief. That's some part of what we're about here, isn't it? And I like the idea that whatever believing we do should be kept nimble. Our knees should be bent all the time. And I especially like, and I recognize too, that truth that these things change by the hour, except sometimes, to me anyway, the wavelength seems to shorten quite a bit, 100 times a minute. perhaps. Anyway, some beliefs that you might entertain in the sense of nod to them, invite them in, hear them out. Sometimes we think of beliefs as things that you have to sign on to in order to get your token, in order to belong in the room. But let's think of them instead as things that we try on, just to see how they work for a few minutes, remembering that we may disbelieve them a few times, even within the next few minutes. So one of my role models for believing things is a character in Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. And I'm going to introduce her to you with this little snippet of dialogue between Alice and the White Queen. The White Queen has just asked Alice how old she is. Alice says, "I'm 7.5, exactly." "You needn't say exactly," the Queen remarked. "I can believe it without that. Now, I'll give you something to believe. I'm just 101, 5 months, and a day." "I can't believe that," said Alice. "Can't you?" said the Queen in a pitying tone. "Try again. Draw a long breath and shut your eyes." Alice laughed. "There's no use trying," she said. "One can't believe impossible things." "I dare say you haven't had much practice," said the Queen. "When I was your age, I did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." So I want to share with you 6 impossible things that I'm practicing believing and occasionally disbelieving. We'll get these in before lunch, at least, if not breakfast. Beliefs by which we might think about daring the future into being. So, clarity is greater than victory. We live in a world now full of very loud, noisy, clanging differences. Differences of opinion, differences of background, differences of experience, differences of feeling and perception. And the clanging from those differences is very loud right now. It seems to have brought our governmental processes almost to a complete standstill. The differences between political perspectives or religious truths held deeply seem irreconcilable. And it's almost impossible to imagine that they could ever somehow be resolved in a way that would allow the clangor to subside and allow us to get on with living together. Victory seems like a stronger thing than clarity, more muscle-bound, more triumphant. But clarity, at least, has legs. Clarity among our disagreements, clarity about what we disagree about and why, may well take us together, alive, into the future that we're trying to dare into being. The great environmentalist and poet and farmer of our time, Wendell Berry, writes that clarity is what we should be hoping for, asking each other for in the midst of our deeper and deeper discoveries of our differences, and put aside any hope for now of victory. So I'm practicing believing that clarity is greater than victory. And actually, I don't have much choice about practicing that belief. I encounter it every morning when I walk into the office, where the timeless verities of at least 4 of the world's great religions are there in each other's faces. These are my 3 colleagues and a friend from Habitat for Humanity in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, week before last. Among us, at least, clarity is greater than victory as far as our differences are concerned. And they're a way for helping us to dare the future into being. Second, forgiveness is greater than anger. The pain of the hurts that come from all those clanging differences, which we know so well, sometimes generate deep pools of anger within us and between us and among us. And that anger, as Professor Brown reminds us, is necessary and even good and important. And we must think about it. Sometimes, though, it seems impossible to imagine that the reasons or occasions for our anger will ever vanish. We're just going to have to honor it and find a way to hold it as we move into the future. Anger seems like the stronger of those 2 things. Forgiveness always seems so nicey nice. But the thing about anger is that as passionate and as gratifying as it is, it's not a destination for a journey. It's what launches a journey. So, with a lot of help from this community in its hardest times, I'm practicing believing that forgiveness is greater even than our anger, and that forgiveness is a way that we can decide to carry what has hurt us forward together as we dare the future into being. Third, engagement is greater than analysis. Our work here is about huge problems, and yet so much of that work takes place far away from the lines of scrimmage of those problems in the carols of Sawyer and Scow and other places around campus. How can we join the struggle that those problems engender in the world? How can we understand what it feels like to live in the midst of some of those problems in the relative safety of our analysis in this place? Analysis is our work. It burnishes our GPAs. It makes our minds agile. But engagement makes our hearts agile. Engagement is greater than analysis because it brings heart and mind together. So I'm practicing believing that engagement is greater than analysis because it embraces analysis in the places where the lived stories of struggle are vivid and essential to what we will learn. This is David Rapp, who's a senior now, meeting our little brother in the host family we lived in a year ago in January in northwestern Nicaragua. Fourth, that hope is greater than paralysis. That's maybe not such a surprising one, but we're learning these days around Williams to take the paralysis that we sometimes feel that much more seriously. It's very real. It brings people to a standstill sometimes. The cumulative weight of all the stress of achievement and all the anger and all the worry and all the scope and magnitude of those huge intractable problems feels sometimes like a lead weight on our shoulders. And it's impossible to believe sometimes that the weight of all of that won't crush that little thing that Emily Dickinson called the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, hope. The philosopher of religion, Cornel West at Princeton, says when he looks around him at the world these days, I'm not optimistic, but I am hopeful. I think some part of that some part of the genesis of that hope comes as we listen to one another's stories of the weight of what's so difficult. So I'm practicing believing that hope is greater than paralysis. With a lot of help from a lot of you, I'm practicing believing that none of us are alone as we try to dare the future into being. Fifth, that seeking is greater than finding. Another sort of obvious one maybe, except that we can be so triumphant sometimes about our eureka moments. I found it. I did it right. I got it. I arrived. I have completed. I finished. It's done. These are good things. But they sometimes make us want to stay in that place, to rest there. Sometimes it's really almost impossible to want to get up and leave the victory circle. I think about this every year when I watch students walk off the commencement platform. They tried so hard for so long to get on that platform, and they're there for what, about 45 seconds after Sarah says their name. And then off they step. So I'm practicing believing that seeking is greater than finding, because it includes finding, but because you always have to go back to the beginning, don't you? Musicians know this. They know that after they find the truth of the piece and put all of their hearts into performing it and putting it out there, where they go is back to the beginning to practice again. Sixth, this is cagey of me, but I knew I was going to be short of time. We need 6, though. Alice and the White Queen said so. So I leave the 6th to you as a little time before lunch or before the future. So these are some things that sometimes I believe and sometimes I disbelieve. Sometimes these beliefs seem to be believing me into being. Sometimes when we talk about beliefs, we say that we espouse them. What an interesting word that is, espouse. Almost like we're married to them. That sounds kind of compulsory, doesn't it? And about tokens. But the thing about being married is that it's such a ride. So stormy, so complicated, so beautiful, so sexy, so crazy-making, so impossible. Relationship to beliefs is a long-term project. Sometimes I can imagine that what we're going to be learning in the future that we're trying to dare into being is to be espoused to the things that call us to our best, deepest, truest selves. This is what I think Wendell Berry, the aforementioned, is talking about in this little poem of his called The Country of Marriage. Sometimes our life reminds me of a forest in which there is a graceful clearing, and in that opening, a house, an orchard and garden, comfortable shades, and flowers red and yellow in the sun, a pattern made in the light for the light to return to. The forest is mostly dark, richer than the light and more blessed, provided we stay brave enough to keep on going in. Thank you.